The advent of the COVID-19 pandemic has created a crisis of unexpected proportions. Among those affected are businesses that are now finding that they have to survive without some of their staff. Following the increased infections of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, some companies are losing their staff or having to quarantine whole groups of staffers in order to prevent the spread of infection. Well, to share with us how bad the problem is and what should be done, we have Mr. Douglas Opio, the Executive Director of the Federation of Uganda Employers. He joins me right now in studio. A very good morning, Mr. Douglas.
Thank you, sir.
Several firms have had to lose their employees to the coronavirus pandemic. Help us paint a picture. How bad is the problem?
The problem has been quite serious. Initially, it was mainly a border issue. So we were getting infections largely attributable to truck drivers. So anytime we test, it was basically about truck drivers. What worries us now is that we have started to find infections at the workplace. Not long ago, about a month or so ago, we started at Toyota getting some 2 staff infected with the virus. But ever since then, several workplaces have found their workers who have tested positive, especially in the Kampala area. So the infection is quite serious within Kampala area because most probably we have now community infections, which previously wasn't the case. We had largely stopped community infections, but since we are discovering it at the workplace, it's a huge problem. And if you see the numbers, how the numbers have started increasing, in some cases even tripling.
But why are we seeing an increase in these numbers?
Largely because we became complacent over time, which is rather unfortunate. A lot of people are no longer wearing their masks. A lot of people are no longer observing social distancing. Many are not sanitizing their hands. Over time, we thought maybe this virus is not as serious. At the beginning, when we had a total lockdown, people were serious. They stayed at home. They took all the safety precautions. But we have taken it a lot more lightly in recent months. And I think that's where the problem is coming from.
Is the problem only centered to Kampala? What about the surrounding environs and the rest of the districts? How bad is the situation? Are employers firing employees as a result of COVID?
Not to my understanding, any employee who has been fired as a result of COVID. COVID is increasingly now becoming an occupational disease. Basically, people are getting infected at the workplace. So when people are infected at the workplace, then the responsibility falls on the employer. And this is why insuring the workers is very important, the workers' compensation. And in some cases, insurance companies have been offering treatment and support for COVID-19 free of charge as long as you are insured with them. But even the surrounding areas, you know, Kampala is a trading or a business district. So a lot of people who actually work in Kampala don't live in Kampala. They come from the surrounding districts, Wakiso, Mukono. So if you find infections increasing in Kampala, then increasingly the neighboring districts are at risk as well.
So if Kampala is affected, rest assured that the rest of the surrounding districts will get the same number of infections.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. So that's the challenge we are increasingly experiencing. And then you have public transportation has already been open, so the risk even spreads further. So meaning somebody can easily move the infection from Kampala to any other district, basically, because public transport has been opened all over the country, basically. Now, there's no restriction at all on movement, except that few occupants. But again, observing of the regulations is still a problem. You still find taxis putting more than the 7 which is required.
But a good thing, I think ahead of the election, we shall have the Electoral Commission today try to expound on those standard operating procedures. People need to know. So today, the Electoral Commission shall be sensitizing the public on the standard operating procedures on the electoral activities in this country. So look out for that conversation from 9 a.m. all the way to 2:30 p.m. at the Kampala Serena Conference Center Hotel. Douglas, what kind of challenges have you seen employees grappling with during this coronavirus pandemic?
There's been a lot of mental health challenges. So essentially, people are stressed at work. And the stress is coming from various directions. In some cases, employees have gone on unpaid leave. Now, initially, we thought the pandemic would be a temporary affair. So you go on unpaid leave thinking I'll be home probably a month or so, or at most 2, and then I will be back at work. I will begin earning again. But businesses have remained on partial operation for now nearly 6 months. So those employees are finding it increasingly difficult to cope. And then some have been on half pay, they're essentially not getting their full salaries. So somebody is at work but wondering how they will meet a lot of expenses that are emerging now. And then we have, of course, the society in which we live. We are social. So you have the support networks, the parents, your siblings, and other people who need your support. And then, of course, the numbers bother us a lot. The more you hear increase in numbers, the more you hear people are dying. And in some cases, even close relatives and friends have died of COVID. And that way, mental health is increasingly an issue of concern for workers. But also, you have to work a lot more. Because of social distancing measures, but the employers are also constrained financially, so they have reduced workforce. But in many cases, workload may not necessarily have reduced. So you have to work a lot more, and that's more demanding for the employees. Of course, with the financial pressure, then you suffer mentally.
Well, talk to us about situations that develop where groups of employees have to be taken and admitted in hospitals. How do you advise owners of such businesses?
Now, at least we are fortunate the government has still been offering support. So employers have not had to pay for the treatment costs. They have not had to pay for those quarantine. But increasingly, I think it would be reasonable, which I think the ministry is already considering, to have these people quarantined, sometimes even at their homes, because some of them are symptomatic. They're not necessarily sick, so not everybody has to be hospitalized. But the challenge for employers, when you have to lock down your business, unfortunately, fixed costs don't listen to lockdown. Whether you have locked down or you're into operation, your rent has to be paid. Your other salaries have to be paid. So the fixed expenses remain a challenge for employers, especially when they have had to undergo quarantine for their employees.
Should employees be dismissed for testing positive? That's the $64,000 question, Mr. Douglas Apio.
Not at all. Not at all. You can't dismiss or terminate employment based on an illness. And it's similar to the discussion we have had in the past, and this was mainly around HIV/AIDS. Whether people should be dismissed because they're infected with HIV. But the same thing applies for COVID. It's not a ground at all for dismissal. It's not a ground at all for dismissal. And unfortunately, for our case in Uganda, thousands of people are recovering, which I think is good for us. So it's not a death sentence at all. It also doesn't compromise one's ability to work in the future. In some cases, people have taken even just 2 weeks and they're well again, ready to work. So you can't dismiss somebody because of COVID.
Employees should be supported while in isolation?
Yes, exactly.
And the cost implications of that?
The cost implication, like I said, at the moment, the government is supporting in that process. But if that was not the case, then the employer...
Government would be supporting, but then remember, if it is the company that wants the employees to be tested, it would have to incur the cost.
Absolutely.
Maybe if there is a case that has been discovered, that's when government comes in. But then if it's me, the employer, who wants to test my employees, and then it's discovered that they had COVID-19, I would have to pay the money.
And that's where workers' compensation insurance becomes very important. Because if your employees are insured, then insurance could help support you with the bill, which for me is a very good thing.
And another pertinent question, should employees be getting special allowances, especially during this time of the pandemic, if they contract the disease while on work?
You know, it's a tricky question. Why is it a tricky question? It's because companies are already financially constrained. it's not a time for bonuses, so to say. It's a time when we have to operate with the bare minimum. Ordinarily, if the circumstances allow within a company, it's the right thing to do. But that must be matched with the capacity.
We are looking at employee X
Yeah.
who got COVID-19 while on the job.
Yeah.
So you contracted the virus. Would
At
it
work.
be right to get some kind of special allowance?
Yeah.
So if you're in isolation, you'd be able to, move ahead with your life.
Yeah, that would be important and in right order, especially if the employer can afford. Yeah.
All right. Employers are now arguing they have to carry an empty bag.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for such employers? I have to isolate almost half of my workforce.
Yeah.
So they are saying and arguing that they are holding an empty bag.
Yeah.
How would you advise such employers?
At the moment, we have been engaging employers a lot on having a business continuity plan in place. It's a risk which is now known to us, that COVID-19 can be discovered at any workplace in Uganda. So employers must have a business continuity plan in place. And that includes scenarios like, should I have to do quarantine for 2 weeks? What exactly will I do? And this should be company specific, so to say.
And these companies and employers, can they, can these employers claim government assistance? Just in case they've lost a lot of revenue to the COVID-19 pandemic, can they clamor to government for assistance?
That is what we have been engaging the government a lot on. And we have been engaging them on several fronts. There are statutory obligations, for instance, that employers have to pay. NSSF is an example, which is supposed to be paid ordinarily monthly. But if an employer is constrained, that might become increasingly difficult. There is also pay as you earn. Taxes which employers have to pay, but we have been trying to engage the government that they need some relief. Also, in other countries, we have seen stimulus packages being issued by the government, so direct financial assistance. In some cases, the government has been offering wage subsidies, so supporting employers to pay their workers, to keep employees at work. But we have also been telling the government that some employers who have some reserves, and they're using those reserves during this period. If the government could consider certain relief, it could be an income tax relief for employers who, despite the conditions that we are experiencing now, are still keeping their employees at work, especially in the hard-hit sectors like the hotels, for instance.
Of course, before I let you go, Mr. Douglas Opio,
yes, sir.
You're the ED for the Federation of Uganda Employers, and you've talked about the challenges plaguing employees. Let's talk about the employers. What are some of the challenges you've seen them grapple with, aside from revenue loss and then having some of their employees quarantined? What are some of the other challenges?
Of course, it's the issue of sales. A lot of them are experiencing low turnout in terms of their sales volumes. So because they're not hotels, for instance, just to give you a simple example, even Serena, where we are, occupancy rates have gone extremely down. But this is a super huge investment. So they have a lot of running costs, water, electricity, and all these things. So the costs are basically rising while the revenues are not increasing at all. And then increasingly, the safety measures that they have to put in place, all those have made it a lot more costly for the employers as well.
And finally, what should be done to support staff in such circumstances being posed by the COVID-19 pandemic?
The starting point, of course, from an employer's point of view, is to ensure that your workplace is operating in line with the standard operating procedures. That's the first. We start with the prevention side. So essentially, is your workplace registered at the bare minimum? So that means your workplace then has been inspected, seen to be appropriate for employees to resume work. Secondly, do you have policies in place, occupational safety and health policy in place? And within that policy, you would then indicate how do you support employees when they get ill. Do you have also a health and safety committee within your organization? Do you have all the requisite measures to ensure that employees don't get affected at all. But otherwise, employers, as much as possible, should provide also information to their employees regarding COVID-19 so that they can be able to manage the situation much better.
And finally, Ms. Opio Douglas, what
Yes,
are the
sir.
rights of the employers moving forward?
The rights of the employers, of course, at the workplace, you're the boss. So your right as an employer is to ensure that the employee, as you pay them, they actually deliver on the job. You know, productivity has been a big issue of concern for us. We are always discussing it. So the productivity of the employee is important for the employer. So work engagement is the right of the employer is to assign work. So you assign work, but also it's important that that work is delivered at the right standard.
And the rights of the employee?
The rights of the employees, of course, you have a right to a fair wage. If you have done work and done it well, you deserve to be paid well. You have the right also to operate in a safe environment, which doesn't expose you to COVID-19, so social distancing measures within the workplace and all such.
And the special allowance is only negotiable.
In situations where employers can afford it, would be in order, my brother.
Wonderful conversation and very insightful conversation with Douglas Opio. He is the
Thank you,
Executive Director for the Federation of Uganda Employers. Many thanks for having made the time to speak to us.
A pleasure.
Very
A pleasure.
insightful.
Thank you.
And for you, the employee and employer, I hope you did get to know what your rights are in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, special allowance for the employees, still negotiable. We are going to take a very short break, but we shall return with another Kickstarter conversation with Mr. Louis Rubongoya. He is the Secretary General of the National Unity Platform, and also Mr. Wilberforce Sediazi. I haven't forgotten about you. He's representing the Alliance for National Transformation. They are both here, the gentlemen, and we shall be discussing the election, the scientific nature of the election. You've noticed in the primaries, the NRM had the leeway to continue conducting their campaigns during the primaries. But then if you're opposition, there is some kind of friction. There is friction from the security apparatus. So does that mean if you're not in the ruling party, you cannot participate in this electoral process? $64,000 question that will be answered by Louis and Sediazi right after this break. We'll be right back.